Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The flight that began like any other. The hum of the bustling airport terminal buzzed around Jordan Williams as he wheeled his modest carry-on toward gate C-16. His gait was calm and purposeful, the walk of a man who had spent much of his life navigating terminals like this one. Despite the noise, the beeping of carts, the announcements over the intercom, and the murmur of passengers, Jordan found a peculiar solace in the chaos. It reminded him of the controlled symphony that was aviation, where every piece worked together in harmony to lift metal giants into the sky. Jordan wasn't just any passenger today. For the first time in years, he was flying as a civilian, seated among the travelers instead of commanding the cockpit. The sensation was odd but welcome. He relished the chance to simply enjoy the flight without worrying about crosswinds, fuel calculations, or the endless strings of radio chatter. As he reached the security checkpoint, Jordan handed over his ID and boarding pass. The TSA agent, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, scanned his documents and gave a polite nod. "Thank you for your service, Captain," the agent said, noticing the small insignia pin on Jordan's jacket that identified him as a pilot. Jordan offered a respectful nod in return. "Appreciate it." He passed through security quickly, as his seasoned traveler's instincts kicked in, shoes off, laptop out, belt in the tray, all in one fluid motion. Moments later, he was heading toward his gate, his sharp eyes scanning the screens for confirmation of his flight's on-time departure. Everything was running smoothly. That was until the boarding process began. Jordan stepped onto the jet bridge, the familiar scent of recycled air and the distant aroma of brewing coffee hitting him like a nostalgic wave. He paused for a moment, savoring it. The aircraft waiting on the other end wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was a place where dreams took flight, where destinations became realities. As he entered the cabin, he exchanged a polite nod with the flight attendant stationed at the door, a tall woman with auburn hair neatly tied back. "Good morning," she said, her professional smile firmly in place. "Morning," Jordan replied, his tone warm but reserved. He'd worn that same smile countless times in his own career. Walking down the narrow aisle, Jordan's trained eyes took in every detail. The subtle wear on the overhead bin latches, the faint outline of the emergency equipment panel embedded in the wall, the angle of the seats in first class, these were things only a seasoned pilot would notice. He found his seat, 3A, a window seat with extra legroom. It was a deliberate choice, he always loved being able to observe the wing and engines. Even as a passenger, he couldn't completely detach from his love of the craft. Settling into the plush first class seat, Jordan felt an odd sense of satisfaction. The seat was far more comfortable than the rigid captain's chair he was accustomed to. It was a small luxury he rarely allowed himself. He leaned back and observed the other passengers boarding the plane. There was the hurried businessman in a tailored suit, a family wrangling two energetic toddlers, and a nervous young woman clutching her boarding pass as if it were a lifeline. He'd seen these types of travelers 1,000 times over. But just as Jordan was beginning to relax, something unusual happened. A flight attendant approached him, her name tag reading, Sarah. She carried a tablet in her hand and wore a slight furrow in her brow, a subtle signal that something was amiss. Her eyes flicked between the screen and Jordan, her professional demeanor carefully masking whatever internal conflict she was wrestling with. "Sir," Sarah began, her voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Jordan straightened slightly in his seat, sensing a hint of tension in her posture. "Of course," he said, his tone measured. Sarah glanced around, as if gauging whether this conversation might attract attention. She took a breath before continuing. "There seems to be a misunderstanding with your seat assignment." Jordan raised an eyebrow, his calm expression betraying no hint of irritation. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes," she replied. "It appears that this seat was reserved for another passenger. I'll need to move you to a different seat." The words hung in the air for a moment. Jordan studied her face, noting the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. This wasn't the first time he had faced situations where assumptions were made, though they had rarely occurred in such an unexpected setting. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" he asked evenly, pulling out his boarding pass and offering it to her. Sarah hesitated, her professional smile faltering for just a second. "No, your ticket is valid." "But," she trailed off, as if searching for the right words. "We'd appreciate your cooperation in relocating." Jordan could feel the weight of the surrounding passengers' eyes on him now. The hushed whispers and sideways glances were subtle but unmistakable. He remained calm, his years of experience in high-pressure situations kicking in. "I'm curious," he said after a beat. "What's the reasoning behind this request?" Sarah's response came slower this time, her tone more measured. "There's been a mix-up with seating arrangements." "It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal." The phrase echoed in Jordan's mind. He'd heard it before, in contexts where nothing personal often carried the undertone of something very personal indeed. "I see," Jordan said, leaning back slightly. He decided not to press further, at least not yet. "Where would you like me to move?" "There's an open seat in economy," Sarah replied quickly, as if eager to diffuse the situation. Jordan's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. He nodded slowly, deciding to play along for now. "Very well." As he rose from his seat, a murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers appeared confused, others avoided eye contact altogether. Jordan's calm demeanor belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. He gathered his belongings and followed Sarah down the aisle toward the economy section. The seat they offered him was sandwiched between two passengers, a stark contrast to the spacious first-class seat he had originally reserved. Jordan settled in without complaint, though his mind was far from at ease. This wasn't about the seat. It was about principle. As the plane began boarding the final passengers, Jordan noticed the curious glances from the flight crew. Whispers passed between them, their faces betraying unease. He caught snippets of phrases. "Is he upset? Should we notify the captain?" And pieced together the tension in the air. Little did they know that the man they had just escorted to economy wasn't merely another passenger. He was a seasoned pilot with over 20 years of experience, a mentor to younger aviators, and a leader in the aviation community. Jordan knew he had a choice to make. He could let this slide, chalk it up to an uncomfortable misunderstanding, and endure the indignity. Or he could rise above it and let his actions speak louder than any words ever could. As the plane taxied to the runway, Jordan gazed out the window. The engines roared to life, and the familiar vibrations of takeoff coursed through the cabin. He closed his eyes, his resolve hardening. This flight was about to become far more memorable than anyone on board could have anticipated. The stage was set for a journey that would challenge perceptions, redefine expectations, and remind everyone of the value of integrity and professionalism. For Jordan, it was no longer just about getting from point A to point B. It was about leaving a mark, one that no one on this plane would soon forget. Rising above assumptions. The plane's ascent was smooth, the engines humming with a rhythm that Jordan found soothing. He had always admired the artistry of flight, the balance between precision and freedom. Yet today, even as he gazed out at the endless expanse of sky, his mind churned with unease. The moments leading up to takeoff replayed in his head. The look on Sarah's face, the awkward glances from passengers, and the pointed relocation to economy, it all pointed to something deeper. Jordan wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but his years of experience navigating both the skies and human interactions had honed his instincts. Something about the situation didn't sit right. Seated in economy, Jordan had to adjust to the lack of space. The middle seat was a far cry from the comfort of first class, but he took it in stride. The passengers on either side of him seemed oblivious to the tension that had marked the earlier moments of the flight. To them, he was just another traveler, unremarkable in the crowded cabin. The man to his left, a younger traveler in his mid-20s, tapped away on his laptop, headphones in place. To his right sat an elderly woman clutching a well-worn book, her fingers tracing the embossed title on the cover. Jordan offered her a polite smile, and she returned it, her eyes crinkling warmly. "Not the most comfortable spot, is it?" she said, her voice soft but cheerful. Jordan chuckled lightly. "No, but it'll do." The woman nodded knowingly. "These planes, they pack us in like sardines. Still, I'm grateful to be heading home to see my grandchildren." As she spoke, Jordan felt a flicker of warmth. Moments like these reminded him of why he loved flying, not just the mechanics of it, but the way it connected people and brought stories to life. He pushed the earlier discomfort aside and focused on the present. After all, he hadn't come on this flight to make waves. He just wanted a quiet journey, a rare day off from the pressures of command. But the universe had other plans. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin crew began their service rounds. Sarah, the flight attendant who had earlier asked him to move, appeared in the aisle with the beverage cart. Her professional demeanor was intact, but Jordan could see the faintest trace of unease in her expression as she approached. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her voice steady but clipped. "Water, please," Jordan replied, his tone neutral. She poured the water into a plastic cup and handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He took it with a polite nod, sensing her discomfort. It wasn't his intention to make her feel uneasy, but he also wasn't about to brush aside what had happened. As Sarah continued down the aisle, Jordan caught sight of another flight attendant, a younger man who appeared to be assisting a passenger a few rows ahead. Jordan recognized him from the pre-flight briefing he had overheard while waiting to board. The young attendant, Mark, seemed enthusiastic but slightly frazzled, a common trait among newer crew members. Jordan made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Younger staff often needed a bit of guidance. A few minutes later, a small commotion drew his attention. A man in the row ahead of him, a middle-aged traveler with a sharp suit and an even sharper tone, was arguing with Mark over an overhead bin. "I told you, I need my briefcase here," the man snapped. "I can't have it back there with the rest of the luggage." "Sir, I understand," Mark said, his voice calm but strained. "But the bins in this area are full. I can help you find a spot closer to the front." "That's unacceptable," the man barked. "Do you have any idea how important this meeting is?" "I don't have time for this incompetence." Jordan's eyes narrowed. He had witnessed scenes like this far too often, passengers berating crew members who were simply doing their jobs. His instinct to step in was strong, but he held back for now, watching to see how Mark handled the situation. "I'll do my best to accommodate you, sir," Mark said, his tone firm but polite. The man huffed and eventually relented, allowing Mark to store the briefcase a few rows forward. As Mark walked back, his shoulders visibly slumped. He paused briefly by Jordan's row, catching his breath. Their eyes met, and Jordan offered him a reassuring nod. "You handled that well," Jordan said quietly. Mark blinked, surprised by the unsolicited support. "Thanks," he murmured, before continuing down the aisle. The incident left a lingering tension in the cabin, but Jordan sensed that it was just the beginning. The atmosphere felt charged, as if something bigger was brewing. He had learned to trust his gut in situations like these, both in the air and on the ground. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a minor technical issue and will need to divert to the nearest airport as a precautionary measure. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll provide updates as we have them." The announcement was calm and professional, but Jordan could hear the underlying tension in the captain's voice. He knew that minor technical issue often meant something far more complex. The murmurs among passengers grew louder. Anxiety rippled through the cabin like an invisible wave. Jordan's pilot instincts kicked in immediately. He scanned the faces around him, assessing the situation. The elderly woman beside him clutched her book tightly, her knuckles white. The young man with the laptop had paused his work, his brows furrowed in concern. Jordan leaned toward the elderly woman. "It's going to be fine," he said softly. "These crews are trained for situations like this." She nodded, though her expression remained tense. I hope so, she whispered. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, ensuring everyone was secured, Jordan noticed Sarah and Mark exchanging hurried whispers near the galley. Their faces betrayed worry, and it was clear they were grappling with the challenge at hand. He decided it was time to step in. Rising from his seat, Jordan approached the galley, drawing curious glances from nearby passengers. Sarah turned to him, her eyes widening slightly. "Sir, please remain seated," she said automatically, though her tone lacked authority. Jordan held up his hands in a gesture of reassurance. "I understand the protocol," he said calmly. "But I think I can help." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but..." "I'm Captain Jordan Williams," he interrupted, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the passengers. "I've flown this aircraft model for over 20 years. If there's anything I can do to assist, let me know." The weight of his words hung in the air. Mark's eyes widened, and Sarah's professional facade cracked, revealing a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You're a pilot?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan nodded. "Yes. And right now, I think you could use another set of experienced hands." Sarah glanced toward the front of the plane, then back at Jordan. She seemed to wrestle with the decision for a moment before nodding. "Follow me," she said. As Jordan made his way toward the cockpit, the passengers watched with a mix of confusion and curiosity. None of them knew yet that the man they had watched relocate to economy was about to play a crucial role in the unfolding drama. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was tense. The captain and first officer were engrossed in troubleshooting the issue, their voices clipped as they communicated with air traffic control. Jordan stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. "I'm Captain Williams," he said, his tone steady but authoritative. "What's the situation?" The captain glanced at him, recognition dawning in his eyes. He nodded quickly. "We've got a hydraulic issue. It's manageable, but we're diverting as a precaution." Jordan nodded, his mind already running through possible scenarios. "Anything I can do to assist?" The captain hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Take the jump seat and monitor systems. If this gets worse, we'll need all the experience we can get." Jordan slid into the jump seat, his movements fluid and practiced. As the plane began its descent toward the alternate airport, he felt a deep sense of purpose settle over him. This wasn't the first time he had been called upon to rise above expectations, and it wouldn't be the last. But today, he wasn't just flying a plane. He was challenging assumptions, proving that character and skill always outweighed prejudice. The weight of leadership. Jordan settled into the jump seat in the cockpit, a compact fold-out chair positioned just behind the captain and first officer. It was a seat he hadn't occupied in years, and yet the environment felt as familiar as his own home. The low hum of the aircraft systems, the crisp glow of the instrument panels, and the rhythmic chatter from air traffic control all brought a calm focus that only seasoned pilots could truly appreciate. The captain, a tall man in his mid-40s named Captain Miller, gave Jordan a quick nod of acknowledgement before returning his attention to the array of screens before him. The first officer, a younger man who looked fresh out of flight school, was visibly tense as he worked through the emergency checklists. "Hydraulic pressure in System 3 is dropping," Captain Miller said, his voice steady but edged with concern. "We've got partial redundancy, but it's affecting our flaps and spoilers." Jordan leaned forward, his years of expertise allowing him to interpret the situation at a glance. The aircraft, a wide-body jetliner, relied on multiple hydraulic systems to control critical functions. Losing one wasn't catastrophic on its own, but it significantly limited maneuverability, particularly during landing. "What's the alternate?" Jordan asked, his tone professional but calm. "We're diverting to Memphis," Captain Miller replied. "Runway 36R. It's long enough for a high-speed landing if needed." Jordan nodded, approving the choice. Memphis had excellent facilities and a well-trained ground crew. It was the kind of airport you wanted under your wheels during a situation like this. But a high-speed landing wasn't ideal, especially with a full complement of passengers and cargo. "Have you briefed the cabin crew?" Jordan asked, glancing at the first officer. "Not yet," the first officer admitted, his voice taut. "We were focused on the systems." Jordan's eyes narrowed slightly. Communication was critical in emergencies, and he knew the crew needed to be fully aware of the situation to keep passengers calm. "I'll take care of it," he said. "You two focus on flying the aircraft." Captain Miller hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Go ahead." Jordan unstrapped himself from the jump seat and moved swiftly back into the cabin. As he stepped into the aisle, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Passengers whispered anxiously, their eyes darting toward the cockpit door. The cabin crew, clustered near the galley, looked equally uneasy, their professional masks struggling to conceal their nerves. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, spotted Jordan and hurried over. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "Hydraulic failure in System 3, Jordan explained succinctly. "We're diverting to Memphis. The landing may be unconventional, but it's manageable." Sarah's face paled slightly, but she nodded, her professionalism reasserting itself. "What do you need us to do?" "Calm the passengers," Jordan said firmly. "Explain the situation in clear but reassuring terms. Avoid technical jargon, just let them know we're taking precautions and the crew is trained for this." Sarah straightened her shoulders, her confidence bolstered by Jordan's steady demeanor. "Understood." Before she turned to address her team, Jordan added, "Have someone check on the elderly and anyone who seems particularly nervous. Personal reassurance goes a long way." She nodded and moved off to relay instructions, her team springing into action. Jordan admired their resolve. Cabin crew often didn't get the credit they deserved, but in moments like these, they were the linchpins of passenger safety. Jordan made his way back to his original seat in economy, where the elderly woman beside him looked visibly shaken. Her book lay forgotten on her lap, and her hands trembled slightly. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice wavering. Jordan offered her a reassuring smile. "We've had a minor issue, but the crew has it under control. We're diverting to Memphis as a precaution." She nodded, though her worry didn't entirely fade. "You seem very calm about all this." Jordan hesitated for a moment, then decided it was time to reveal a bit more. "I'm a pilot," he said. "I've handled situations like this before. I promise you, you're in good hands." Her eyes widened in surprise, and a small measure of relief seemed to settle over her. "Thank you," she said softly. Jordan leaned back in his seat, his presence alone helping to calm those immediately around him. But his mind was already back in the cockpit, running through scenarios. He trusted Captain Miller and the first officer, but he knew how critical every decision would be in the next hour. The descent into Memphis began smoothly, the engines throttling back as the aircraft lost altitude. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with more specific instructions. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. As we approach Memphis International Airport, we'll be preparing for an expedited landing. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, all carry-on items are secured, and your seatbacks are in the upright position. Our crew is here to assist you, so please follow their instructions carefully. Thank you for your cooperation." The calm tone did much to soothe the cabin, but Jordan could still feel the undercurrent of anxiety. He watched as Sarah and her team moved methodically through the aisles, double-checking seatbelts and securing loose items. Their professionalism impressed him. When the wheels touched down on Memphis's runway, the landing was firm but controlled. The aircraft rumbled down the tarmac at a higher-than-normal speed, the brakes and reverse thrust working overtime to bring it to a halt. Applause erupted from the passengers, a collective release of tension that had built over the last hour. Once the plane was safely parked at the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with more specific instructions. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. As we approach Memphis International Airport, we'll be preparing for an expedited landing. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, all carry-on items are secured, and your seatbacks are in the upright position. Our crew is here to assist you, so please follow their instructions carefully. Thank you for your cooperation." The calm tone did much to soothe the cabin, but Jordan could still feel the undercurrent of anxiety. He watched as Sarah and her team moved methodically through the aisles, double-checking seatbelts and securing loose items. Their professionalism impressed him. When the wheels touched down on Memphis's runway, the landing was firm but controlled. The aircraft rumbled down the tarmac at a higher-than-normal speed, the brakes and reverse thrust working overtime to bring it to a halt. Applause erupted from the passengers, a collective release of tension that had built over the last hour. Once the plane was safely parked at the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom one final time. "On behalf of the crew, I want to thank you for your patience and cooperation during today's flight. We encountered a technical issue but were able to resolve it safely. Please remain seated until the cabin crew has opened the doors, and as always, thank you for flying with us." Jordan waited until most of the passengers had disembarked before heading toward the cockpit. Captain Miller and the first officer were still at their stations, finishing their post-flight checks. Both men looked up as Jordan entered. "Thanks for your help," Captain Miller said, extending a hand. "It's not every day you find a seasoned pilot sitting in economy." Jordan shook his hand, a faint smile on his lips. "You handled it well. I was happy to assist." The first officer, still looking a bit rattled, nodded appreciatively. "It was good having you here." As Jordan stepped out of the cockpit and into the terminal, he spotted Sarah and Mark standing near the boarding gate. They both looked relieved but exhausted. "Captain Williams," Sarah said, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and respect. "Thank you. I don't think we could have managed that as smoothly without you." Jordan shook his head. "You and your team did an excellent job. It's easy to underestimate the role of the cabin crew, but today you showed why you're indispensable." Mark, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I had no idea who you were when we asked you to move." "I'm sorry about that." Jordan smiled warmly. "No need to apologize. Today wasn't about where I sat, it was about getting everyone here safely. That's all that matters." As he walked away, the events of the flight replayed in his mind. It had been a test of skill, composure, and teamwork, a reminder that leadership wasn't about titles or appearances, but about rising to the occasion when it mattered most. And today, Jordan had done just that. A conversation that changed everything. Jordan stepped off the jet bridge and into the bustling terminal at Memphis International Airport. The usual airport chaos surrounded him, announcements blaring, passengers hustling to their next destinations, and flight crews moving with purposeful efficiency. But for Jordan, the world felt quieter somehow. The tension of the last few hours had eased, replaced by a calm satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a difference. As he walked toward the baggage claim, he noticed Sarah and Mark trailing slightly behind. Their conversation was subdued but animated, and they occasionally glanced in his direction. It was clear they wanted to speak with him, but were hesitant to approach. Jordan slowed his pace and turned slightly, giving them an opening. Sarah noticed and nudged Mark, who looked nervous but determined. Together, they quickened their steps until they were walking alongside him. "Captain Williams," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same professional tone she had used during the flight, though now tinged with respect. "Do you have a moment?" Jordan stopped and turned to face them. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Mark fidgeted with his name badge, his gaze shifting between Jordan and the floor. Finally, he spoke. "I just wanted to apologize again. For asking you to move seats. We didn't realize who you were, and I feel terrible about it." Jordan regarded him thoughtfully. The young man's earnestness was clear, and it reminded him of his own early days in aviation, when he had often second-guessed himself and feared making mistakes. "No need to apologize," Jordan said, his tone gentle but firm. "You made a decision based on the information you had at the time. That's part of the job. What matters is how you handle things moving forward." Mark nodded, though he still looked uncertain. But it wasn't fair, he insisted. We assumed something about you that we shouldn't have. Sarah stepped in, her expression serious. He's right. The way we handled that wasn't professional, and it's not the standard we hold ourselves to. I wanted to thank you for the way you handled it, with grace and patience. You could have made things difficult for us, but instead, you stepped up when we needed you most. Jordan smiled faintly. I've learned over the years that people often act based on assumptions. It's not about holding grudges, it's about using those moments as opportunities to teach and grow. Sarah tilted her head, considering his words. You really embody what it means to be a leader, don't you? Jordan chuckled. Leadership isn't about commanding people, it's about inspiring them. And sometimes, that means letting actions speak louder than words. As they continued walking, Jordan noticed a small crowd of passengers gathered near the baggage claim area. A mix of familiar faces from the flight stood chatting in small groups, their earlier anxiety replaced with relief. He recognized the elderly woman who had been seated next to him, now speaking animatedly with a younger couple. The businessman who had clashed with Mark earlier was on the phone, his tone noticeably softer than before. One passenger, a woman in her early 30s, with a toddler balanced on her hip, approached Jordan directly. Excuse me, she said, her voice hesitant but warm. Are you the pilot who helped during the flight? Jordan blinked, momentarily taken aback. I assisted the crew, yes, he said modestly. The woman smiled, her relief evident. I just wanted to say thank you. My little girl was so scared, and knowing someone with your experience was on board helped me stay calm. It meant a lot. Jordan nodded, his smile genuine. I'm glad I could help. The crew deserves most of the credit, they kept everything running smoothly. The woman looked toward Sarah and Mark, who were now speaking with a small group of passengers. They were wonderful too. It's just, you never expect someone to step in the way you did. It gave us all a sense of security. Her words lingered with Jordan as she walked away. He had always believed in the importance of quiet leadership, of doing the right thing without seeking recognition. Yet hearing the impact of his actions directly from passengers reminded him of why he had chosen this path in the first place. Once the baggage claim area had cleared out, Jordan found himself approached by Captain Miller and the first officer, who had finished their post-flight duties and were heading toward the crew lounge. Captain Williams, Miller said, extending his hand again. I just wanted to thank you one more time. Having you in the cockpit today was invaluable. It was a team effort, Jordan replied, shaking Miller's hand firmly. You handled the situation well. Miller smiled, though his expression turned contemplative. You know, I've been flying for over 15 years, and I like to think I've seen it all. But today reminded me that there's always something to learn. Watching you stay calm and focused under pressure was a lesson in itself. The first officer, standing slightly behind Miller, chimed in. I was nervous, he admitted, his voice quieter. But seeing you step in gave me the confidence to keep going. I'll remember that the next time we're in a tough spot. Jordan nodded, his expression serious. The key is to trust your training and your instincts. And remember, there's no shame in asking for help when you need it. Aviation is a team sport. Miller chuckled. Truer words were never spoken. As the crew dispersed, Jordan took a moment to reflect. The day had been far from ordinary, and yet it had reaffirmed many of the values he held dear: humility, collaboration, and the importance of leading by example. He thought back to the countless flights he had piloted, each one a unique tapestry of challenges and triumphs. Today's flight, though, felt particularly meaningful. Making his way to the exit, Jordan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a message from one of his former mates, a young pilot named Elena whom he had trained years ago. The message read, Captain Williams, I just saw a post about what happened on your flight today. You're a legend. Always inspiring us to be better. Hope we cross paths in the skies again soon. Jordan smiled, shaking his head slightly. He had never sought to be a legend, he simply wanted to do his job well and leave things better than he found them. But if his actions could inspire others, then perhaps he had achieved more than he ever set out to. As he stepped into the cool Memphis air, Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey wasn't just about flying planes, it was about lifting people, challenging perceptions, and proving that leadership was not about rank or title but about character. And in that moment, he knew, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of another chapter. Turning challenges into legacy. The crisp Memphis evening air filled Jordan's lungs as he exited the terminal, his step steady but his mind far from still. The events of the day replayed in his mind, but this time not with tension or regret. Instead, there was a sense of clarity, a realization that this seemingly ordinary flight had left an indelible mark, not just on him but on everyone involved. He paused near the curb, waiting for a ride to his hotel. The soft glow of the terminal lights reflected off the windows of parked shuttles and taxis, casting long shadows across the pavement. As he stood there, the elderly woman who had been seated next to him during the flight appeared at the terminal door, walking slowly but with purpose. Her sharp eyes caught his, and she smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude etched across her face. "I was hoping to catch you before you left," she said, approaching him. "I didn't get a chance to properly thank you." Jordan shook his head lightly. "No thanks necessary. I'm just glad we all got here safely." She chuckled softly. "I appreciate your humility, but you should know that what you did today was extraordinary. You calmed so many of us, not just by your words, but by your presence. That's rare." Jordan smiled, the kind of smile that comes from genuine connection. "Thank you. That means a lot." They chatted for a few minutes about her grandchildren, her plans for the week, and her gratitude for having made it to Memphis without incident. As she left, Jordan felt a deep warmth. It was these moments, the human connections, that made all the hard work and sacrifice of his career worthwhile. At the hotel that night, Jordan sat by the window in his room, gazing out at the city lights. The familiar hum of air conditioning and the faint sound of traffic below created a soothing backdrop as he reflected on the day. He pulled out his tablet, intending to catch up on emails, but his attention was drawn to a notification from one of the aviation forums he followed. Curious, he opened it. The headline read, "Off-duty pilot steps in to assist crew during hydraulic failure." Jordan's eyebrows raised slightly. The story had already spread, written by one of the passengers who had been on the flight. The post described the series of events in vivid detail, painting Jordan as a calm, composed figure who had risen to the occasion in a time of uncertainty. As he scrolled through the comments, he saw messages from other pilots, flight attendants, and aviation enthusiasts. Some expressed admiration, while others shared stories of their own experiences with mid-air challenges. One comment, however, stood out. "This is what aviation is all about: teamwork, leadership, and rising above assumptions. Captain Williams reminds us all why we love what we do." Jordan leaned back in his chair, the words resonating deeply. He had always believed in the power of leadership through action, but seeing it articulated by others gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He closed the tablet and turned his gaze back to the city lights, letting the quiet pride of the day wash over him. The next morning, Jordan headed to the airport for his connecting flight home. As he entered the terminal, he noticed a group of airline staff clustered near a counter, speaking animatedly. One of them, a young woman in a crisp uniform, looked up and spotted him. Her eyes widened, and she nudged her colleagues. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward as Jordan approached. "Are you Captain Williams?" Jordan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's me." Her face lit up. "We heard about what happened yesterday. Some of our team were talking about it this morning. It's incredible how you stepped in to help." Jordan smiled modestly. "Just doing what anyone in my position would have done." The group exchanged glances, and another staff member, a man with a badge that read Operations Manager, stepped forward. "If you don't mind, Captain, we'd love to invite you to our crew lounge for a moment." Some of our team would like to meet you. Jordan was slightly taken aback, but agreed. Moments later, he found himself in a comfortable lounge filled with flight crews and staff. A few clapped politely as he entered, while others approached to shake his hand. Among them was an older pilot who introduced himself as Captain Rodriguez. "I've been flying for 30 years, Rodriguez said, his handshake firm. "And I've always said that the true measure of a pilot isn't how they handle themselves in the cockpit, but how they handle the people around them. What you did yesterday set an example for all of us." Jordan felt a wave of humility. "I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. The real credit goes to the crew, they kept everything under control." Rodriguez nodded, his expression serious. "Still, you reminded us all why we love this profession. It's about more than just flying planes. It's about leadership, trust, and humanity." As Jordan boarded his flight home later that day, he reflected on the unexpected attention. For most of his career, he had operated in the background, quietly mentoring younger pilots, ensuring passengers reached their destination safely, and upholding the values he held dear. But now, it seemed, his actions had sparked something larger. As the plane took off, Jordan gazed out the window at the receding city below. He thought about Sarah, Mark, Captain Miller, and the passengers he had interacted with. Each of them had taught him something valuable about resilience, perception, and the power of connection. He resolved to use this experience as a catalyst. Perhaps it was time to share more of his knowledge and experiences with others in the industry. He had always believed in lifting others up, but now he saw an opportunity to do so on a broader scale. In the weeks that followed, Jordan began reaching out to aviation schools and professional organizations, offering to speak about leadership, teamwork, and overcoming challenges. His story from that day on the flight became a touchstone, a way to illustrate the importance of character in a profession often defined by technical skill. And while he continued to fly, his role as a mentor and leader expanded. Younger pilots sought his advice, crew members shared their challenges, and passengers occasionally recognized him, thanking him for his quiet heroism. Through it all, Jordan remained true to himself. He didn't seek accolades or recognition. For him, the reward was in knowing that he had left the skies, and the people within them, a little better than he had found them. And in that, Jordan found not just a career but a legacy, a testament to the idea that leadership is not about where you sit, but how you rise.